Hello, and welcome to the misty, haunted region known as Terokkar Forest, formerly a brighter land called Talador. It is here we reach the hub city of Shattrath and have our first major clash against Illidan. Now, as with many sections of lore in World of Warcraft, there are a few contradictions about this area, namely the Bone Wastes and at what point it was created. But as usual, we're going to go with my personal preferences and changes, and I'm going to drag you, affectionately, along for the ride. Let's get started. Travelling south from Zangarmarsh brings us right to Shattrath city, where guards usher us through the northern gates and point us to the city centre, as Tyrion told them to look out for us. We find Liadrin, Yrel and Tyrion talking to Khadgar, Adal and Shattar High General Aurelian, discussing the siege and what to do about it. In canon, Aurelian is just floating in a prison crystal with very little to explain how he got there and no attempt to rescue him. Okay. We're brought up to speed by Tyrion, who gives us the short version of Shattrath's history. Adal keeps the peace between the Aldor and the Scryers, the former comprised of Draenei priests who sheltered in the city ruins after Draenor's destruction, and the latter made up of the best and brightest defectors of Kael'thas right before his split from Illidan. The Aldor don't trust the Scryers and refuse to associate with them unless it's necessary, but right now both groups have to clench their teeth and work together. As we join the conversation with everyone else, Khadgar references the troubling intel we helped Liadrin find in Hellfire. He believes it's the reason behind the siege. When it began, an Illidari commander, Grogan Steelskin, demanded their unconditional surrender to Lord Illidan's rule. General Aurelian notes that their agents have witnessed Illidari forces clashing with demons all over Outland, killing, banishing, and in many cases subjugating them to add to Illidan's army. Illidan claims to be fighting against the Burning Legion, but to do so he is tormenting all of Outland in an attempt to forcibly convert them to his cause. He fights with demons in his ranks, he abducts orcs and corrupts them with demon blood far in excess of what happened the first time around, and he himself and all who follow his teachings are corrupted by the Fel themselves. He would see them all thralls to demonic corruption for the sake of defeating the Legion, but in that victory, the only demons left would be them, with him to hold their reins. The cost of such a victory is far too high. With that, Khadgar sends us out with Yrel and Liadrin to both investigate the intel and to discover why Illyrian's stronghold hasn't responded to requests for aid. Laurelin and Varisa were sent to investigate, but they haven't returned. He grimly adds that they also lost contact with the Cenarion Thicket after hearing a terrible noise echo out of the forest, like a thunderclap crossed with an explosion. They aren't sure what happened, but he fears the worst. To give Shattrath some breathing room, we perform strafing runs with the Shatari Skyguard, taking out siege equipment as we go. Before the airspace gets too dangerous, we land behind enemy lines and use our position to sneak around, sabotaging munitions, stealing medical supplies, and taking out the head engineer, sending his Ganag underlings into a panic. On the way to Illyrian's stronghold, we come across this version of the Cenarion Thicket, another old Watcher camp reclaimed by the Cenarion Circle. In canon, it was hit with a prototype mana bomb, and the only druid there who survived was in a state of delusional hysteria. The only other member of the thicket to survive was Earthbinder Tavgren, a Tauren druid who was away for days on a study of the Bone Wastes. Now, you could argue that it doesn't really look like a bomb went off because it was the early stages of the weapon and they perfected it later, but we're going to bring it in line with an actual mana bomb. A small prototype nuke is still a nuke. Here, the thicket is cratered, trees in the impact zone are shattered and point away, and the buildings are broken. Arcane energy streaks the ground in purple and white, rushing away from the center, and the air is hazy with latent energy. There are bodies everywhere, but the closer to the center we get, the stranger they look, until right where the explosion went off, we find floating corpses rendered ashen husks. The energy that killed them glows through the cracks. Tavgren is standing safely outside the range of the latent magic, aghast and despairing the loss of his comrades. He implores us to search the ruins and gives Yrel, Liadrin and the adventurer temporary runes of protection, pocket-sized stones that will absorb the raw magic in the air before it gets to us, like radiation protection. It is, however, limited, so he urges us to hurry in our search for survivors among his friends. Yrel and Liadrin are both unsettled by the indiscriminate destruction, and even a brief investigation quickly turns up pieces of the bomb and the body of a broken male with an Illidari insignia embedded in the chest. The one survivor, a male night elf called Trelos, can only cry deliriously about a terrible burning light. He tells us his blood is on fire, he can't stop shaking, and he struggles to control his shapeshifting. He also complains about feeling unbearably hungry. No, he corrects himself, he's thirsty in a way he never has been. Liadrin grimly recognizes it as an arcane thirst. Whatever unleashed this destruction has seeped into his body. She inspects him closely and notes that he has strands of distinctly green hair amidst the white. He's suffering from mana shock, and we bring him back to Tavgrin. The Earthbinder is relieved at least someone survived and thanks us, pledging to safely escort Trelos back to their fellows in Zangamash. Yrel notices Liadrin looking troubled, but Liadrin brushes off the concern and we press on. We find Delarian's stronghold is struggling with strange creatures coming from Auchindoun. They resemble elementals, but nothing like anyone here has ever seen. They're difficult to look at, a gangly body of kaleidoscopic limbs and geometric shapes, mouths filled with black teeth opening and sealing all over their bodies. The sound of them is no better, multiple voices shrieking together, discordant and distorted, causing fear and paranoia in those around them. Laurelin and Verisa are relieved to see us, and after pushing back the attacking creatures, they go on to explain the situation. According to the Stronghold's leader, Captain Auric, the Draenei grave city of Auchindoun was mostly quiet until 2 years ago when a terrible explosion shattered it like a burst bubble. The surrounding forest became desolate and petrified, and almost all the skeletons that covered the ground were reduced to osseous sand. They scouted ahead to figure out what they were dealing with, but the most they managed to ascertain was that something unimaginably powerful and unthinkably malevolent was released, and it has something to do with the Shadow Council. Liadrin sneers that the Shadow Council are as persistent as roaches and need to be treated as such, and Yrel agrees, insisting they cannot allow Auchindoun to be further desecrated. Once Liadrin describes what happened to the Cenarion Thicket and why we came here, Captain Auric points us in the direction of Turem. His scouts have seen broken and lost ones travelling to both Shattrath City and Firewing Point from there, carrying varied and suspiciously arcane-rich packages. Firewing Point is an outpost held by the Blood Elves still loyal to Illidan, and before the siege on Shattrath and the elemental attack, Captain Auric was planning on clearing them out. He sends us instead, and Yrel stays to help reinforce the stronghold and learn more about what is happening at Auchindoun. Now, before we leave, it's clear from NPC chatter and Auric's dubious attitude towards Liadrin that the High Elves here don't think much of Liadrin and her kin. Like Verisa, they consider the Blood Elves of Azeroth misguided fools and traitors to throw their lot in with the Horde. Nonetheless, Liadrin doesn't take the bait and remains focused on their mission. With Liadrin, Verisa and Laurelin, we head to Turem and discover the connection between a travelling broken merchant called Empor, the bomb, and Firewing Point, finding evidence that he transported the key components to make it. One such component was an ancient Draenei power core, and Liadrin remarks that Yrel mentioned Illidan's people are searching for these cores. We head to Firewing Point and sneak around with Laurelin's help, running interference, eavesdropping on conversations, and collecting evidence. We witness a communication between the man in charge, Shattrath Vol'dun, and an image of Kael'thas. It turns out these elves are only pretending to be loyal to Illidan. Shattrath informs Kael'thas that they're ready to deploy the bomb against a real target, and makes note that he is personally responsible for the code to activate and disarm as necessary, and will defend it with his life. He also notes that the finished plans are being delivered to Kael'thas as they speak, and the materials won't be a problem to collect in Netherstorm, as the plans detail how to reverse engineer the core. Kael'thas is pleased by this, but notes that Shattrath seems troubled. The soldier insists he is just anxious to secure their people's future, and eager to punish Illidan for refusing to share his secrets despite all the blood their people shed for him in securing Outland. Kael'thas reassures him that Illidan will regret keeping them hungry. Their new allies can actually fulfill their promises, and when their time comes, no one will be able to bring them to their knees ever again. Shattrath agrees, and the conversation ends, only for us to ambush and capture him alive for questioning. Laurelin takes the codes off him, but Liadrin can barely start asking him questions before he swallows a potion. Bursting into flames, Shattrath bellows and attacks, and although we cut him down, the noise of this draws the outpost's attention. We fight until the remaining Blood Elves retreat, leaving the bomb behind, and using the codes from Shattrath, we disarm it, and a cutscene plays. Verisa and Liadrin are horrified by the casual annihilation their people are engaging in. Verisa believes this only proves her point about the Blood Elves being selfish and misguided, but Liadrin pushes back, citing the way they were treated after they lost their home. Humans like Marshal Garithos couldn't wait to break their necks after years of staring enviously at the wealth and power of Quel'Thalas. She snarls at Verisa for so easily kowtowing to the Alliance yet again, trusting that humanity has their best interest at heart now that they're weak, outnumbered, and subservient. The Horde only accepted the Sindori as equals once they proved they had the strength to stand on their own. Laurelin interjects the Horde wouldn't have considered them at all without Sylvanas fighting tooth and nail to make Thrall listen. Verisa refuses this, vowing that she could never trust the people who killed her little brother and both parents. Liadrin looks at the deactivated bomb, contemplative, and has a moment of clarity and shame that it's something that should have horrified her years ago, before it happened to her people and her home. But it's so easy to shut off one's empathy when your actions are constantly couched in jingoistic language. It's to defend your home. They'll do worse to you given the chance. They're not like us. They're just savages. She looks at Verisa pointedly, and it's clear she's talking about the Amani, which Verisa visibly realizes. She opens her mouth, then averts her gaze and closes it. After a moment, Laurelin remarks that when they're done here, they need to confront this darkness at its source in Netherstorm. Our prince seems to be forgetting himself. We return to Alarion's stronghold and confirm with Captain Auric and Yrel what happened. Auric is horrified by the plans and relieved it's dealt with. While he agrees that Kael'thas needs to be brought down, for now they must contend with immediate concerns. We leave the deactivated bomb in his hands. He asks us to confront whatever nightmare is unfolding in Auchindoun while he musters forces to send to Shattrath. He doesn't want those monsters coming back to catch them unawares and undermanned. Travelling across the bone wastes, we pass ruins, skeletons, and shattered trees, while Yrel guides us into the grave city, and along the way she recalls memories of visiting her family's mausoleum. The Draenei were here for a few thousand years before the Legion found them, and Auchindoun housed all their dead. It was hallowed ground, expansive and reverently peaceful, a place for contemplation and remembrance. The Orcs and their Legion masters shattered the sanctity of their dead, and at the very centre, surrounded by pulverized bone and shadow, Yrel flatly remarks that this is where her parents died. I tried, but I could not reach them. My father fell first, then my mother. There was no time to retrieve bodies. We could only run, and leave those who could not to their fates. I could not remove the stench of that slaughter from my skin for weeks. Liadrin stands beside her and shares that her people suffered similar atrocity, describing the grief, rage, and bone-deep horror of the scourge brutalizing her home and loved ones, and the mind-numbing shock of seeing those loved ones raised and used against them. No one, no matter how mentally sound they are, is equipped for that image. Laurelin adds that there is a unique pain that comes from being the one turned against your friends and family, forced to desecrate the home you died defending, and knowing you can do nothing but comply. She feels she could never go home again because of what she was forced to do, what she failed to do. All her sisters feel that way, even the Dark Lady herself. They are ashamed. Verisa shares as well the helplessness of being too late, of being told what happened after the fact, after all the uncertainty and panic once they lost communication with Quel'Thalas, to be too far away to do anything but weep at the unfathomable hole that was just ripped through your heart. She had family to take care of. Her infant sons needed her. but the shame she feels for not being there when Sylvanas needed her is like an axe buried in her ribs. Yrel roughly wipes away tears and thanks all of them for sharing, agreeing with Laurelin that it doesn't necessarily lessen the pain they all carry, but it makes her feel understood, less overwhelmed by this place, and she greatly appreciates that. Eager to get back to business, we move on and approach the entrance of the Shadow Labyrinth, where we find a dying warlock and other bodies. The survivors warn us away from the place, which he name-drops as the Shadow Labyrinth, explaining that the Shadow Council sect here try to summon something powerful enough to hand this world to them on a platter. They succeeded, but the thing is uncontrollable and impossible to communicate with without breaking the mind. They managed to contain the monster, trapping it between their reality and its home dimension, but it wasn't enough, as since then it's corrupted the rest of his group. Now they're trying to help it fully manifest in Outland, but they removed the containment to do so, and if the ritual was interrupted, the entity would have no anchor and would slip back to whatever unfathomable corner of the universe he came from. As the cultist dies, he warns us to beware Murmur. We head inside with Yrel, Liadrin, Verisa, and Laurelin. The labyrinth is dark and filled with maddened acolytes. Screams of pain echo from its bowels, along with the strange, discordant howls of something otherworldly. Those howls slowly grow in volume the deeper we get, fighting through cultists who both praise the grandeur of their new god and scream for it all to end.
You must hear it. You must hear the song. We will spread the song. We will spread the song. Now, run away. Leave.
The worst ones are those whose bodies have begun to break down. Flesh and bone are warped, elongated, taking on the impossible geometry of the elementals that attacked Illyrian. Some have twisted together into multiple bodies, merging into multi-voiced horrors that howl and sing. Verisa stumbles at one point, struggling to push through the noise that subtly chips at their minds, searching for a way in. It's Laurelin who reaches out and grabs her with a hand on the shoulder, reminding her that if she falls here, she won't find Illyria or see her family again. Verisa takes a moment to breathe and stands, awkwardly thanking Laurelin for the gesture. Killing the group's leader, Grandmaster Vorpil, we stop to examine the Codex of Blood, a grim book detailing the extent of the danger Murmur poses to any world, near or far, should he fully manifest. He is a world destroyer from the farthest and strangest corner of the cosmos, and even at a fraction of his power, he is capable of untold chaos. We hurry to the deepest part of the labyrinth, where the orcs are almost unrecognizable as such, and the noise is smothering. After a terrible struggle, we succeed in stopping the ritual. With a baleful cry, Murmur recedes, and the labyrinth is filled with a deafening silence. With that threat dealt with, we rendezvous with Captain Orruk's forces at Shattrath and successfully break the Illidari line. Tyrion, Khadgar and the High General push out from the city, and together we force them all the way back to the Shadowmoon Gate, where Illidan himself makes an appearance, resulting in a cutscene. Illidan stares down the Shattrath army and berates us as weaklings and fools to think that we can defeat the Legion as we are, absolutely convinced that the only right way to do this is his. He sneers at the Scryers in particular, remarking that he never should have trusted their leader Voronthal. The man was too concerned with his own people before the Legion. In a devastating show of demonic power and brutal skill, Illidan carves through many in the forces arrayed against him. Despite this, he is ultimately driven back with the rest of his army by a combined, focused attack by Adal and Ziri. The Naru strike him with a blast of overwhelming light, setting the demonic blood flowing through his body on fire and lighting up his veins in gold. Illidan screams, and his illusion shatters, exposing his deathly deteriorating appearance. Some among his army look surprised, and 2 demon hunters rush forward to defend him. Smoldering, Illidan bellows a retreat and erects a wall of fellfire. When it simmers down to embers, he and his forces are gone, and the Shadowmoon Gate is sealed once again. The battle was bloody and costly, but our forces cheer in celebration, and this victory lays the foundation for the Shattered Sun offensive to form later. Outlying quests in the zone involve helping the Arakoa find a new home away from their hostile kin in Sketis, investigating signs of Valeria's passage with Verisa and Laurelin, and helping out around the city. Amberlance can also be found asking questions around the lower city about secretive ways in and out of Shadowmoon Valley. If you talk to her, she elaborates that the information we helped her find in Zangarmarsh points to a secluded prison in Shadowmoon Valley, grimly stating that she won't get her hopes up, but she needs to follow this trail to the end. Speaking of the lower city, this version isn't an open-air trench, but made of larger segmented built-up districts that clearly indicate who lives there. There are areas for orcs, Arakoa, Saberon, Broken and Lost Ones, Ethereals, and so on. The temple within which the Aldor first practiced their rituals is used like a town hall, where a council representing the lower city does its best to look after their needs. It's through this council that we receive quests to unlock Auchindoun crypts, Sethic halls, and the Mana Tombs, following similar stories as they do in canon, but with their dedicated solo modes that bring along characters relevant to them. In Auchindoun crypts, we help Liadrin and Yrel put the tormented spirits of that place to rest, ending in a final confrontation with Maladar, where Yrel does her best to get through to him, but he is too far gone and forces her to strike him down. Liadrin acts as a supportive presence, reassuring Yrel that Maladar wasn't her responsibility, and that the pain of this place has a chance to heal now because of her. Afterwards, they can be found at the World's End Tavern, having a genuine conversation regarding their different approaches to the light, the wounds they share, and the burden of duty. They don't completely agree with each other, but they at least understand where they're coming from. In Sethic halls, we help a group of Raven priests attack a cult led by Talon King Ikis, where summoning Anzu was part of the old druid quest chain to unlock Swift Flight Form. In this version, he is part of the dungeon story to begin with, and we free him of the cult's influence. This dungeon story would also address the unnamed old god that the Arakoa attempted to summon in canon, and it's just chilling, right outside the Wildhammer stronghold in Shadowmoon. I'm pretty sure the guards can see it from the walls. We'll expand on that bit of lore in a later video, but the point is, the story mode for this would delve deeper into their corruption by that old god, give it an actual name, and the uncorrupted Arakoa get their Shadow Raven god back without losing even more than they already have. Yes, I know that the Arakoa we see in Outland are technically corrupted Arakoa because they're not the flighty kind, but like, shush, let me live. In the Mana Tombs, we diverge from canon again, and Nexus Prince Shafar is part of an ethereal group that joined forces with the void creatures that destroyed their planet and changed them into the energy beings they are now. Originally, the Ethereum were a group seeking to avenge their destroyed world, but for some reason Blizzard decided that in pursuit of that, they were driven mad and became twisted, so now we have to kill them. Instead, they're the ones who send us after Shafar for his role in their homeworld's downfall. The aggressive ethereal faction is instead the Consortium. Driven by greed, they will trade in almost anything if it gets them more power and influence. Legitimate goods, stolen artifacts, bodies, and they are picking over Outland to rob its inhabitants of all valuables. The Protectorate faction remains the same, but they're in opposition to the Consortium instead of the Ethereum. And with that, we are done with Terokkar. Obviously certain areas and reputations are only available when you're level capped or able to fly, and there would still be instances of that, but I wanted to weave more of it into the central story that can branch out after the main thread of the zone is dealt with. I meant to do this last time, but I'd like to shout out my newest patrons, number 1087 and Artfan. Thank you for watching, please take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time as we journey to the verdant plains and forests of Nagrand.